Okay, let's unpack this because usually when we look back at the foundations of Western civilization, we picture these very pristine white marble columns, right?
Right, yeah, like everything is very clean and orderly.
Exactly. We picture, rational philosophers debating logic in the agora and solemn early Christians reading scriptures in a quiet devotion. It's all very structured, very sober.
This is basically the bedrock of our modern rationality. We have this collective assumption that our cultural roots were fundamentally serious and, honestly, intellectually dry.
But then you step into the world of modern archaeochemistry, and suddenly that pristine white marble gets splashed with a neon mind-bending reality.
Totally.
Because we're looking at a historical landscape today that is, frankly, completely wild. It's a premise that challenges almost everything we thought we knew about the origins of our own culture.
It really shatters that orderly picture entirely. I mean, we are talking about a totally different paradigm of human experience here. What we are exploring today is an idea known as the pagan continuity hypothesis. And the core question is basically this. What if the foundation of Western civilization, and specifically the earliest practices of Christianity, were built not just on faith in Scripture, but on highly potent psychedelic drugs?
Which just sounds like something out of a science fiction novel.
Right.
But we are diving into some serious research today. We're guiding you through the findings presented in Brian C. Muraresku's book, The Immortality Key, along with a collection of expert interviews spanning ethnobotany, the classics, and theology.
Yeah, it's a massive stack of sources.
It really is. And to understand how this psychedelic foundation could even be possible, we have to kind of rewire how we think about the ancient world. Specifically, we have to look at what our ancestors were actually drinking.
Right, because when we hear, ancient wine or ancient beer, our modern brains immediately map that on to what we know today.
Oh, for sure.
You probably imagine a slightly chunkier, unrefined version of a modern microbrew. Or maybe, I don't know, a cloudy natural wine you'd get at a trendy bar.
Right, just a rustic beverage to wash down some ancient bread.
But the archaeochemistry tells a completely different story. I mean, ancient alcohol was a highly complex, magical, and potentially lethal witch's brew.
Lethal?
Yeah, literally. To see this, we can look at a site called Godin Tepe in modern-day Iran. This dates back roughly 12,000 years. Archaeologists unearthed these massive 42-gallon vats featuring chemical traces of beer.
Wow, 42 gallons.
Yeah, huge vats. And this discovery actually reignited a massive, long-standing debate in anthropology.
The classic bread versus beer debate.
Exactly. For a long time, the assumption was that hunter-gatherers settled down and invented agriculture because they figured out how to bake bread.
Because it's a survival mechanism, right? You need calories.
Right, calories. But think about the sheer amount of grueling, back-breaking labor required to harvest wild grain 12,000 years ago.
It would be awful.
It was. So some anthropologists argue that humans wouldn't have subjected themselves to that kind of labor just for, a few extra calories of toast.
That makes sense.
Instead, they settled down to brew what researchers call graveyard beer for ritualistic, ecstatic feasting. The social and spiritual glue of a psychoactive brew was the actual catalyst for human civilization.
That changes the whole narrative. We didn't settle down for the bakery. We settled down for the brewery.
Essentially.
But it goes way beyond just fermenting barley and water, doesn't it? Because if we fast forward to the 1st century AD to a site called the Villa Vesuvio outside of Pompeii.
Well, this is a great example.
Yeah, archaeologists analyzed the crusty residue inside ancient wine jars preserved there, and the chemical footprint they found is just insane.
Staggering is really the right word for it, because alongside the expected grapevine material, they found traces of opium, cannabis, white henbane, and black nightshade.
Wait, hold on. Black nightshade. If you're listening to this and thinking, isn't nightshade incredibly toxic?
You're exactly right. It is very toxic.
I'm pretty sure if I put nightshade in a blender today, that's a lethal concoction. And it wasn't just plants, right? The researchers also found the remains of frogs and lizards in these wine jars.
He did, yeah.
So they weren't just catching a mild buzz after a long day in the forum. They were actively dosing themselves with heavy toxic hallucinogens and amphibians. How did they not just mass poison themselves? Like, what is the logic behind throwing a toad into a vat of spiked wine?
What's fascinating here is that to understand that, we have to understand their biochemical mastery. Let's start with the amphibians.
Okay.
Certain species of frogs and toads secrete highly psychoactive toxins from their glands as a as a defense mechanism, basically. We're talking about compounds like bufotenin or 5-MeO-DMT, which is one of the most powerful psychedelics on Earth.
Oh, wow.
So throwing them in the brew wasn't just some bizarre culinary choice. It was a deliberate chemical extraction.
Okay, but how does the extraction work without, killing the person drinking it?
Right, so this is where we get to the core of ancient pharmacology. Alcohol in the ancient world wasn't primarily a beverage. It was a menstruum.
The menstruum.
Yeah, which is an old a chemical term for a chemical solvent.
Yeah.
If you just boil these toxic plants and amphibians in water, you get a highly dangerous, unstable tea. It could easily kill you.
Right.
But if you steep them in an alcoholic solution, the alcohol acts as a solvent. It safely extracts the specific fat-soluble psychoactive alkaloids while leaving some of the more dangerous water-soluble toxins behind.
That is wild. Just so we don't lose anyone, an alkaloid is essentially what?
Think of an alkaloid as a naturally occurring organic compound in a plant or animal that has a massive physiological effect on the human nervous system.
Okay.
Like caffeine is a mild alkaloid, nicotine is an alkaloid. But in this case, we are talking about intense hallucinogenic alkaloids. The ancient brewmasters used alcohol to deliver these heavy alkaloids safely. They were highly sophisticated ancient biochemists.
And Muraresku's research points to one critical element they worked with, something called ergot.
Ergot is really the smoking gun here. It's a naturally occurring fungus that grows on grain, specifically barley and rye. Now, if you consume raw ergot, it causes a disease called ergotism.
Right, which is pretty bad.
In the Middle Ages, they called it St. Anthony's fire. It is a horrifying condition. The fungus contains vasoconstrictors, meaning it stops the blood flow to your extremities. Your fingers and toes literally turn black and become gangrenous. You hallucinate wildly before you die.
That is terrifying. But, and this is a massive but, under the right chemical conditions, ergot is also a natural precursor to LSD.
Precisely. Albert Hofmann, the Swiss chemist who actually discovered LSD in the 1940s, he studied the ancient world very closely.
He did?
Yeah, and he believed that ancient Greek priestesses could have easily manufactured a non-toxic LSD-like compound from ergot right in their ancient kitchens.
No way.
Yes, it didn't require a sterile modern laboratory or synthetic chemicals. It just required an unbroken oral tradition of botanical knowledge.
Which is exactly what modern archaeochemistry is now confirming. Researchers are finding chalices in ancient necropolises with traces of both human bone and ergot inside them.
Exactly.
So we know they had the technology, which perfectly sets the stage for the most famous spiritual event of the ancient world. If they possess this mind-bending biochemical technology, this is what they did with it. They built an empire of spiritual experience.
We were talking about the Eleusinian Mysteries.
Yes.
Eleusis was a sanctuary just outside of Athens, and it's essentially the Vatican of the ancient world. For 2,000 years, the absolute best and brightest minds of Greece and Rome, Plato, Marcus Aurelius, Cicero, they all made the pilgrimage to this site.
Paint a picture of what that pilgrimage actually looked like for us, because it wasn't just showing up for a church service.
Not at all. It was an arduous physical and psychological buildup. Initiates would walk the sacred way from Athens to Eleusis. They would fast for days. They would engage in ritual chanting. By the time they entered the Telesterion, which was the great initiation hall, in the dead of night, they were physically exhausted and psychologically primed.
Completely broken down.
Exactly. And the culmination of this entirely sensory overload was drinking a secret, highly guarded potion known as the kykeon.
And based on the ergot evidence and the descriptions left behind, the consensus building among these researchers is that the kykeon was heavily spiked with psychedelics.
The effects described by the initiates certainly point to it, because the goal of this trip wasn't just to feel good or have a mild philosophical revelation.
All right.
They went into that dark hall to encounter Demeter and Persephone, Persephone being the queen of the dead. This was functionally a death cult.
But not in a morbid apocalyptic sense, right? The goal was to achieve immortality. Their motto captures it perfectly. If you die before you die, you won't die when you die.
That phrase is just a brilliant distillation of the ultimate psychedelic experience. They were seeking a psychological death, what modern psychology calls ego death.
The complete dissolution of the I, the self, the identity you hold in your daily life. When that ego dissolves, you feel a profound, undeniable connection to something eternal, something infinite. And once you experience that, the physical fear of your own bodily death completely vanishes. You've already experienced the other side.
It almost sounds like an ancient, high-stakes wellness retreat.
It's a great way to put it.
But instead of paying thousands of dollars to do trust falls and drink green juice in the woods, you fast for days, drink a psychedelic ergot potion in a dark cave, and get a literal, ego-dissolving preview of the afterlife. You drink the kykeon, and you meet the universe.
And we should note the academic context here, because for a long time, suggesting this would get you laughed out of a university.
Oh, absolutely.
Back in the 1970s, classical scholars like Karl Ruck suggested that the founders of Western rationality were tripping on psychedelics at Eleusis, and he was ridiculed. He was practically exiled from mainstream academia for daring to suggest that Plato might have been high. Wow. But today, with this new archaeochemical data, Ruck is largely being vindicated.
Completely vindicated.
Okay, so this brings up a huge historical mystery. If this profound psychedelic ritual was the absolute bedrock of Greek and Roman society for 2 millennia, I mean, how on earth did it just vanish? You don't just misplace an empire built on ego death.
The fascinating reality is that it didn't vanish. It evolved.
Okay.
And this is where the narrative shifts from the classical Greeks to the earliest Christians. This is the heart of the pagan continuity hypothesis.
The idea that early Christianity didn't just arrive and instantly wipe out paganism, it absorbed it. It adapted the existing cultural hardware to run a new software.
Exactly. Think about the Greek Dionysian Mysteries. Dionysus was the god of wine, but this wasn't table wine. It was a sacred vehicle used to achieve divine frenzy.
Right.
And Muraresku points out a crucial linguistic clue that completely changes how we read these ancient texts. Look at the play The Bacchae by Euripides, written in 405 BC.
Yeah, the traditional English translations usually have characters referring to the sacred wine as a treatment for misery or a cure for sorrow. Right. But the actual ancient Greek word used in the text for that sacred wine is pharmakon, which literally translates to drugs.
Wow.
They had a separate, normal word for regular wine, which was oinos. But Euripides specifically calls this concoction a drug. And crucially, in the ancient world, the brewmasters, the keepers of these botanical recipes, the mix masters of the pharmakon, they were almost exclusively women.
Wait. So if women were the exclusive keepers of the spiked wine recipes in the Greek world, and early Christianity was emerging in that exact same cultural melting pot, are we suggesting that the original Christian Holy Communion, the bread and the wine, was actually a continuation of this psychedelic tradition?
The historical evidence Muraresku compiles points exactly in that direction. If you look at the early Christian texts, particularly the Gospel of John, women like Mary Magdalene are highly elevated.
For the first 3 centuries, before it was legalized and standardized by the Roman Empire, Christianity was a clandestine, underground religion. It was practiced in secret house churches and in the catacombs.
Out of the public eye.
Exactly. And in those secret, intimate spaces, women were often the religious leaders. They were the priestesses mixing the sacramental wine.
So the early Eucharist wasn't just a symbolic sip of grape juice and a dry wafer. It was a sacrament that allowed the initiates to directly experience the divine. You didn't just sit in a pew and listen to a priest read about God from a scroll. It was an active, participatory mysticism fueled by pharmacology.
The early Christian Eucharist, viewed through this lens, was an experiential communion with God, engineered through ancient botanical knowledge passed down to generations of women.
But if that's true, if the early Christian Eucharist was this powerful, direct experience led by women in house churches, why does modern communion look so completely different? I mean, today, you go to a massive cathedral, a male priest hands you a piece of dry bread, you get a tiny sip of regular table wine, and you go back to your seat. The mysticism is gone. What happened to the pharmakon?
According to the historical argument Muraresku builds, and we're just reporting what the sources argue here, it comes down to a massive consolidation of power.
Okay.
In the 4th century, the Roman Empire legalized Christianity, and it eventually became the official state religion. As the institutional church centralized its authority in Rome, it began to strictly restrict the priesthood to men.
It sounds exactly like a hostile corporate takeover. Well, the new management comes in, they look at the company structure, and they realize that the secret recipe gives the entry-level employees way too much direct access to the CEO. It democratizes the spiritual power too much. So management decides to lock the recipe in the vault, fire the original inventors, and replace the product with just a symbol of the product.
That's a highly accurate way to visualize the power dynamics, actually. The men taking control of the newly minted church hierarchy couldn't perform the authentic psychedelic sacrament themselves because the women, the original keepers of the botanical keys, refused to hand over their secret recipes to this new male-dominated institution.
So if the institution couldn't control the authentic experiential sacrament happening in these underground women's networks, they had to eradicate it.
And Muraresku argues this initiated what was essentially a 1,500-year war on drugs.
Which was simultaneously a literal war on women, because the historical estimates suggest the suppression eventually contributed to the execution of roughly 45,000 women for witchcraft across Europe.
Right. And notice the specific patterns of who was targeted during the Inquisitions. They frequently went after mother and daughter pairs.
Which seems senselessly cruel until you realize the brutal logic behind it. If your goal isn't just to punish someone, but to permanently sever an oral tradition, a complex botanical recipe passed down by word of mouth from mother to daughter, you have to eliminate both generations simultaneously.
Otherwise, the knowledge survives.
Right.
The logic is chilling, but effective. They weren't just burning witches casting magic spells. They were executing rival pharmacists. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the critical inflection point for Western culture.
How so?
This is the exact moment where religion fundamentally shifted. It moved from being a direct, lived experience of the divine, where you actually feel the presence of God, to a rigid set of dogmas and beliefs that you simply have to accept on the authority of the institution.
The mystic is replaced by the manager. The psychedelic wine is replaced by the placebo. It's a tragic loss of human potential.
It really is.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The timeline doesn't end there. The institutional church may have successfully suppressed that ancient recipe for a millennium and a half. But today, modern science is suddenly recreating that exact same spiritual experience, not in a secret catacomb, but inside sterile clinical laboratories.
It is a remarkable full-circle moment in human history. To see this, we have to look at the groundbreaking modern studies coming out of institutions like Johns Hopkins University and NYU.
Okay.
They are administering psilocybin, which is the active psychoactive compound in magic mushrooms, to terminal cancer patients who are suffering from severe existential anxiety and the terror of impending death.
And the story of Dinah Baser from the NYU trials really drives this home, I think. She was a 63-year-old woman suffering from debilitating anxiety over her ovarian cancer. Even though she was technically in remission, the crippling fear of the cancer returning was completely ruining her life.
Exactly.
But importantly, she was a strict atheist. She thought mysticism and spirituality were just a bunch of baloney.
She enrolls in the NYU psilocybin trial looking for psychological relief. And during her guided clinical session, she has this incredibly profound internal journey. Under the influence of the psilocybin, she actually visualized her intense fear as a physical object inside her body. She saw it as a dense black lump of coal sitting under her rib cage.
Wow.
In her mind, she screamed at it, she banished it, and she watched it vanish.
But the truly wild part is what happens next. The strict atheist part gets totally upended because after she banishes the physical manifestation of her fear, she reports that she was suddenly bathed in God's love.
Yeah.
She moved into this timeless state where concepts like birth and death simply had no meaning. She called it a state of always being. Hold on, how does that work? She goes in as a strict, convinced atheist, and this chemical compound just overrides a lifetime of secular belief and reliably triggers a profound religious experience.
Yes. And that is exactly what the clinical researchers are finding so revolutionary. It doesn't seem to matter what your prior religious conditioning is, or whether you have any at all. Roughly 75% of the terminal patients in these psychedelic trials rate that single clinical dose as one of the top 5 most meaningful experiences of their entire lives.
Up there with the birth of their children or the death of a parent.
Exactly. And the therapeutic mechanism here, the reason why it works, is that it completely removes their fear of death by simulating the exact death of the ego that the ancient Greeks were seeking at Eleusis thousands of years ago.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
When the psilocybin dissolves their sense of individual self, they realize that their consciousness might somehow expand beyond their failing physical body. And when they experience that expansiveness, the terror of their biological death just melts away. The modern clinical setting is doing exactly what the ancient Kaikion did. It allows the patient to die before they die.
That is just beautiful. So, what does this all mean for you and me today? Connecting this deep, hidden history of the ancient world to the cutting-edge neuroscience of the present day, It seems to suggest that humans are quite literally biologically wired for mystical experiences.
Absolutely.
Religion, at its absolute core origin, wasn't born from someone sitting down and rationally reading a book of rules. It was born from a profound, ego-dissolving experience of the universe.
It suggests the hardware for transcendence is built into our very biology. All you need is the right botanical key to unlock it.
Right.
And this raises a massive question, one that brings us to a final thought for you to consider. Drawing from the Los Angeles Review of Books interview and our stack of sources today, we are currently living through what is widely being called a psychedelic renaissance.
Which is still wild to think about given the last 50 years of strict global prohibition.
It is, but if Muraresku's hypothesis holds up, if early Christianity was indeed founded on a psychedelic sacrament, it sets the stage for a massive, impending legal and cultural collision. In the United States, we have a law called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This is the specific legal framework that currently allows the Native American Church to legally use peyote as a sacrament, despite it being a Schedule I substance.
So, let's play this out. If a modern Christian church looks at this new archaeochemical evidence and decides they want to reintroduce a psychedelic Eucharist today, say, using psilocybin-infused wine to reclaim their original practice, would the U.S. government's Religious Freedom Restoration Act protect them?
It is the ultimate legal cliffhanger. Could the DEA legally step in and stop a modern religion from reclaiming a sacrament that, historically speaking, was violently taken from them 1,500 years ago?
Wow.
If the practice is sincere, if it's rooted in this newly uncovered historical tradition, and if it's practiced safely, the legal argument for protecting it is surprisingly strong.
That is a staggering thought to end on. We might be on the absolute brink of a new reformation, a literal return to the roots. Think about it. The next time you picture the foundations of Western civilization, maybe don't just picture those quiet, orderly white marble columns. Picture the vibrant, chaotic, awe-inspiring mystery of the ancient pharmacon.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We'll leave you to mull over that new reality. Until next time.